I was hiding behind the staircase, the only place in the house where I could listen without being seen. My parents' voices were muffled, but the tension was so thick it could suffocate you. I leaned in closer, my heart racing, trying to catch every word. "I can't keep pretending, Nolan," my mother said, her voice shaky but determined. "I know, Marissa. It's not fair to anyone," my dad replied, sounding defeated. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew they'd been arguing more, but this felt different. It felt final. "Grant and I are serious, and the girls need stability," she continued, and my stomach dropped. Grant. That was a name I'd heard only in passing, a shadowy figure in the background of whispered conversations. "And Vivian's expecting. We have to think about the future," my dad added. I could almost hear the weight of his words crashing down around me. Vivian. Expecting. My name is Elara, and this was the moment my world started to unravel. I was 14, and suddenly everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to make sense of it all. My parents were getting divorced, and they both had new families lined up, ready to step in and replace the one we had. The betrayal was a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless and confused. I wanted to scream, to burst into the room and demand answers. But instead, I stayed frozen, listening as they discussed logistics, like I was some piece of furniture to be divided. "We'll tell her together," my mom said, her voice softening. "Right. She deserves to hear it from us," my dad agreed. Deserves. As if they were doing me a favor. I clenched my fists, anger bubbling up inside me. How could they do this? How could they just move on like I was nothing? I didn't wait to hear more. I slipped away, my mind racing. I needed air, space to think. I grabbed my bike and pedaled furiously down the street, the wind whipping against my face. It didn't help. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, and no amount of speed could outrun them. Eventually, I found myself at the edge of the park, my usual escape when things got too heavy. I sat on the swing, pushing myself back and forth, trying to find some semblance of calm. But the words kept echoing in my head. Grant. Vivian. Expecting. I thought about my parents, how they used to be when I was little. How they'd laugh and dance in the kitchen, how they'd tuck me in at night with stories and kisses. When had that changed? When had they stopped being my parents and started being strangers with new lives? As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, I realized I was alone. Truly alone. My family was breaking apart, and I was caught in the middle, left to pick up the pieces. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my jeans, and made my way back home. I knew I couldn't avoid them forever. They'd want to have their talk, to lay out their plans as if it was all so simple. But I wasn't ready to face them, not yet. When I got back, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I crept upstairs to my room, closing the door softly behind me. I needed to think, to figure out what this meant for me. I wasn't going to let them decide my life without a fight. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange sense of determination settle over me. If they were moving on, then so would I. I'd find a way to make this work, to carve out a place for myself in this new reality. But first, I needed to know more. About Grant, about Vivian, about this new life they were so eager to build. I needed to understand why they'd chosen this path and what it meant for me. And as I drifted off to sleep, one thought lingered in my mind, a small spark of hope amid the chaos. I would find a way to make them see me. To remember that I was still here, still part of this family, whether they liked it or not. The morning sun filtered through my curtains, but it did nothing to warm the chill that had settled in my bones. I dragged myself out of bed, the weight of yesterday's revelations still pressing down on me. Today was the day I'd meet Grant and his daughters, Tessa and Lila, my new stepsisters. Just thinking about it made my stomach twist. Downstairs, the smell of pancakes filled the air. My mom was at the stove, flipping them with a cheerful efficiency that seemed almost forced. She glanced over her shoulder as I entered the kitchen, her smile strained. "Morning, Elara." Excited to meet Tessa and Lila, she asked, trying too hard to sound casual. I shrugged, grabbing a plate. I guess. The truth was, I wasn't excited. I was dreading it. but I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing how much this hurt. I sat at the table, poking at my pancakes, trying to find the right words to express the turmoil inside me. But before I could speak, the doorbell rang. "They're here," my mom announced, her voice a mix of relief and anticipation. She hurried to the door, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Moments later, she returned with Grant and the twins in tow. Grant was tall, with an easy smile and a firm handshake. He greeted me warmly, but there was something about him that felt off, like he was trying too hard to be liked. "Hi, Elara. I've heard so much about you," he said, his eyes scanning my face for any sign of approval. "Yeah, same," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Tessa and Lila were identical, both with long blonde hair and matching outfits that screamed coordinated effort. They stood close together, whispering and giggling, casting quick glances my way. "Hi," I said, trying to sound friendly. "Hi," they chorused back, then immediately turned their attention back to each other, as if I was an afterthought. The morning passed in a blur of awkward introductions and forced conversations. My mom hovered around Grant, her laughter too loud, too bright. I could see how much she wanted this to work, but it only made me feel more like an outsider in my own home. As we sat down for lunch, Marissa's focus was entirely on the twins, asking about their school, their friends, their hobbies. I watched as they basked in her attention, feeling a pang of jealousy. I tried to join in, to find some common ground, but every attempt was met with disinterest or polite dismissal. "So, Elara, what do you like to do?" Grant asked, trying to include me in the conversation. "I like reading," I replied, hoping to steer the topic to something I could contribute to. "Reading? That's cool. Tessa and Lila love books too," he said, but the twins' expressions told a different story. They exchanged a look, then burst into giggles. "Yeah, picture books," Tessa said, and they both laughed again. I felt my face flush with embarrassment and anger. It was clear I wasn't going to fit into their little club. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm going to my room," I announced, not waiting for a response. I retreated upstairs, slamming my door behind me. The laughter from the kitchen echoed in my ears, a reminder of how out of place I was in this new family dynamic. I flopped onto my bed, staring at the ceiling as tears of frustration welled up. Hours later, there was a soft knock on my door. I wiped my eyes and sat up as my mom entered, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "Elara, I know this is hard," she began, sitting on the edge of my bed. "But we need to make this work. Grant and the girls are going to be part of our lives now." I bit my lip, trying to hold back the words I wanted to shout. Instead, I just nodded, my silence speaking volumes. "Tomorrow's a big day," she continued, oblivious to my struggle. "I've planned a special dinner for your birthday." I blinked, the words not quite registering. My birthday. I'd almost forgotten. But the way she said it, like it was just another event on her calendar, made my heart sink. "Sure, Mom," I said, my voice flat. As she left, I realized that this wasn't just about meeting new people. It was about losing the family I thought I had. And as much as I wanted to fix things, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I was the one who needed to change. To find a way to survive in this new reality, whether they saw me or not. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of laughter echoing through the house. It was my birthday, but any excitement I might have felt was dampened by the memory of yesterday's awkwardness. I dragged myself out of bed, hoping against hope that today would be different. In the kitchen, Tessa and Lila were already at the table, their plates piled high with pancakes. My mom was bustling around, her attention fully on them. I hesitated in the doorway, feeling like an intruder in my own home. "Morning, Elara," my mom chirped, glancing up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I made your favorite breakfast." "Thanks," I mumbled, taking a seat. I noticed a small gift bag on the table, but before I could reach for it, Tessa grabbed it. "What's this?" she asked, her voice dripping with curiosity. "It's for Elara's birthday," my mom replied, but her focus was still on flipping pancakes. "Oh, right. Happy birthday," Tessa said, handing it over with a shrug. I opened the bag, pulling out a new book from my favorite series. It was a thoughtful gift, but the lack of fanfare around it made it feel more like an afterthought. I forced a smile. Thanks, Mom. The morning passed in a blur of half-hearted birthday wishes and conversations that didn't include me. By the time we were supposed to leave for Nolan's house, I was already exhausted. My dad had insisted on hosting a birthday dinner, and I hoped it would be a chance to escape the tension here, even if just for a few hours. When we arrived, Vivian greeted us at the door, her smile warm and welcoming. Nolan was in the kitchen, juggling a pot of pasta and a phone call, his usual multitasking mode. Jackson was nowhere in sight, which was a relief. I wasn't ready to deal with his pranks today. Happy birthday, Elara, Vivian said, giving me a quick hug. We've got a little surprise for you later. Thanks, I replied, trying to muster some enthusiasm. Dinner was a surprisingly pleasant affair. Nolan and Vivian seemed genuinely happy to have me there, and for a moment I let myself relax. But then, as we were finishing up dessert, I overheard a snippet of conversation between Vivian and my dad that made my heart stop. Are you sure about using Elara's college fund? Vivian asked, her voice low but clear. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. College fund? I strained to hear more, my pulse quickening. It's just for a little while, Nolan replied, glancing in my direction. We'll pay it back. My mind raced, piecing together the implications. They were planning to use my college fund for something else. Something that didn't involve me. A wave of betrayal washed over me, stronger than anything I'd felt before. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I need some air, I said, not waiting for a response. I fled to the backyard, the cool evening air doing little to calm my racing heart. I paced the patio, my thoughts a chaotic storm. How could they do this? How could they take something meant for my future and use it for their own needs? My hands trembled with anger, and I clenched them into fists, trying to steady myself. A rustling sound made me turn, and I saw Jackson watching me from the shadows. He stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Hey, he said, shoving his hands into his pockets. Hey, I replied, my voice tight. Look, I know we haven't exactly been friends, he began, his tone surprisingly sincere. But I overheard what they said. It's not right. I blinked, surprised by his unexpected support. You heard? Yeah. And I'm sorry. For everything, he said, his gaze meeting mine. I didn't know things were this messed up. His words were a small comfort, a reminder that I wasn't completely alone in this. But they didn't change the reality of the situation. My parents were using my future as a bargaining chip, and I had no idea how to stop them. Thanks, I said, my voice softening. I don't know what to do. Jackson nodded, his expression thoughtful. Maybe you don't have to do anything right now. Just keep your eyes open. Things have a way of coming to light. I nodded, appreciating his advice even as my mind raced with possibilities. As I stood there, the weight of the betrayal settling over me, I realized that I couldn't rely on anyone else to protect my future. I'd have to find a way to do it myself. With a new resolve, I headed back inside, determined to keep my guard up and my eyes open. Whatever came next, I would be ready. The days that followed my birthday were a blur of tension and unease. I felt like I was living in a house of cards, one wrong move away from everything crashing down. Grant and my mom seemed oblivious, wrapped up in their own world with Tessa and Lila. I was just a shadow, drifting through the rooms, trying to stay out of their way. One afternoon, I found myself alone in the house. Grant was out showing a property, and my mom had taken the twins shopping. The silence was both a relief and a reminder of how isolated I felt. I wandered into the study, a room I rarely entered, drawn by a strange sense of curiosity. As I flipped through some papers on the desk, I stumbled upon a document that made my heart skip a beat. It was a financial statement detailing the use of my college fund. My name was there, but the expenses listed were for things I had no part in. It was all for the twins, private school fees, extracurricular activities, even a summer camp. My chest tightened with anger and betrayal. Just then, the front door opened and Grant walked in. He spotted me in the study, his expression shifting from surprise to something more guarded. Hey, Elara. What are you doing in here? He asked, trying to sound casual. I was just looking for a book, I lied, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. He nodded, but his eyes flicked to the papers in my hand. Find anything interesting? Not really, I replied, setting the papers back down carefully. I could feel his gaze on me, assessing, calculating. Well, if you need anything, just let me know, he said, his tone light but his eyes sharp. Sure, I said, walking past him, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to get out of there, to clear my head. I biked over to Fiona and Leo's house, the only place where I felt I could breathe. They welcomed me with open arms, their warmth a balm to my frayed nerves. We sat in the kitchen, the familiar scent of Fiona's homemade cookies filling the air. How are things at home, Elara? Fiona asked gently, her eyes full of concern. I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. It's complicated, I admitted, picking at a cookie absent-mindedly. Leo leaned forward, his expression serious. You know you can always stay here if you need to. We're just a phone call away. Their offer was tempting, more than they could know. But I couldn't shake the feeling that leaving would mean giving up, letting them win. I needed to find a way to protect what was mine, to stand my ground. Thanks, I said, my voice filled with gratitude. I'll keep that in mind. As I biked home, the weight of the decision pressed down on me. I couldn't let them take everything without a fight. But how could I confront them without tipping my hand, without losing what little leverage I had? When I got back, the house was dark, the only light coming from the living room where Marissa sat, a glass of wine in hand. She looked up as I entered, her expression unreadable. Where have you been? She asked, her voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Just out, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She nodded, taking a sip of her wine. You know, Elara, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we talked about your future. About what you want. Her words caught me off guard, and I studied her face, searching for any hint of sincerity. What I want? Yes, I know things have been rough, but I want you to know you're important to me, she said, her gaze steady. I wanted to believe her, to take comfort in her words. But the memory of the financial statement loomed large in my mind, a reminder of the reality I couldn't ignore. Thanks, Mom, I said, forcing a smile. I'll think about it. As I headed up to my room, I realized that the power dynamics were shifting. My mom's sudden interest in my future felt like a calculated move, a way to placate me while they continued with their plans. I needed to be careful, to play my cards right. That night, as I lay in bed, I made a decision. I wouldn't let them use me or my future as a pawn in their games. I would find a way to protect what was mine, to carve out a path that was truly my own. And if that meant standing up to them, so be it. I was ready to fight. The days turned into weeks, and I found myself spending more and more time at Fiona and Leo's house. It was a refuge, a place where I could breathe without the constant pressure of proving myself. School had become my sanctuary, a world where I could lose myself in books and numbers, where I could excel and find a sense of worth that was missing at home. One afternoon, I was at Fiona's, helping her grade papers. She was a high school teacher, and her dedication to her students was something I admired. As we sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of essays, she looked up and asked, "How are things with your mom and Grant?" I hesitated, not wanting to burden her with my problems, but knowing she'd see through any lie. It's complicated, I finally admitted, echoing the words that had become my mantra. Fiona nodded, her expression thoughtful. You know, Elara, sometimes the best way to deal with complicated situations is to simplify them. Focus on what you can control. Her words lingered in my mind as I biked home that evening. I knew she was right, but simplifying things seemed impossible when everything felt so tangled and messy. When I got home, the house was unusually quiet. I found Marissa in the living room, her expression tense as she hung up the phone. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine for something I couldn't quite identify. "Elara, we need to talk," she said, her voice a mix of urgency and resignation. "About what?" I asked, bracing myself for whatever was coming. "Your dad called. He wants to discuss your college fund," she said, her gaze steady but guarded. My heart skipped a beat. The college fund. The one they were using for the twins. I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. What about it? He thinks it's best if we all sit down and have a conversation about your future, she replied, choosing her words carefully. I could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken words hanging between us. My future, the one they were trying to shape without me. Why now? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Because it's important, Elara. We want to make sure you have the best opportunities, she said, but there was something in her tone that didn't quite match her words. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I needed time to think, to figure out how to handle this new twist. I retreated to my room, my mind racing. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. I needed to stand up for myself, to make them see that I wasn't just a pawn in their plans. The next day, I found myself at Nolan's house, sitting across from him and Vivian. My mom was there too, along with Grant, their expressions a mix of concern and determination. Jackson hovered nearby, his presence a silent support that I hadn't expected but appreciated. Thanks for coming, Elara, Nolan began, his voice calm but firm. We wanted to discuss your college fund and how we can best use it to support your education. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I know about the expenses for Tessa and Lila, I said, watching their reactions closely. Vivian shifted uncomfortably, while Nolan's expression tightened. Elara, it's not what you think, he started, but I cut him off. Then what is it? I asked, my voice unwavering. Because it seems like you're using my future to pay for theirs. Marissa leaned forward, her tone conciliatory. We're planning to reimburse the fund, Elara. It was just a temporary solution. A solution for what? For their education? What about mine? I shot back, my frustration boiling over. Grant cleared his throat, trying to diffuse the tension. We're all on the same team here. We want what's best for you. I shook my head, disbelief mingling with anger. If that were true, you wouldn't be using my money without telling me. The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy. I could see the cracks in their facade, the realization that I wasn't going to back down. Finally, Nolan spoke, his voice softer. We'll figure this out, Elara. We'll make things right. I nodded, but inside, I felt a shift. This was my turning point, the moment I decided to take control of my life. I wouldn't let them dictate my future. I would find a way to protect what was mine, to carve out a path that was truly my own. As I left the house, Jackson caught up with me, his expression earnest. That was brave, he said, falling into step beside me. Thanks, I replied, my heart still pounding. You know, if you ever need help, I'm here, he added, his offer genuine. I smiled, a small but real smile. I might take you up on that. As we walked, I felt a new sense of determination. I wasn't alone in this fight, and for the first time, I believed I could win. The weeks that followed the confrontation with my parents felt like a never-ending storm. I threw myself into my studies, determined to prove that I was more than just a chess piece in their game. But no matter how hard I tried, the weight of everything seemed to press down on me, relentless and unforgiving. One afternoon, as I was leaving school, I saw Jackson waiting by the gate. He waved me over, his expression a mix of concern and determination. Hey, Elara, he said, falling into step beside me. I heard something you might want to know. What is it? I asked, my curiosity piqued despite my exhaustion. It's about your college fund. I overheard Grant talking to my mom, he said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. They're planning to use it for a down payment on a new house. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, and I had to stop for a moment to steady myself. A new house, I repeated, disbelief mingling with anger. Yeah, they're saying it's for the family, but we both know what that means, Jackson said, his voice laced with frustration. I nodded, my mind racing. This was worse than I'd imagined. They weren't just using my money temporarily, they were planning to make it disappear entirely. I felt the ground slip from beneath me, the sense of betrayal cutting deeper than ever. Thanks for telling me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Hey, we're in this together, Jackson replied, giving me a reassuring nod. Let me know if there's anything I can do. I forced a smile, grateful for his support even as my heart ached with the weight of this new revelation. I biked home, the wind stinging my eyes as I replayed the conversation in my mind. How could they do this? How could they justify taking my future for themselves? When I got home, the house was quiet. I found Marissa in the kitchen, her back to me as she prepared dinner. I hesitated, the words bubbling up inside me, but unsure of how to start. Finally, I took a deep breath and said, "Mom, we need to talk." She turned, her expression guarded. "What's on your mind, Elara?" "I know about the house," I said, watching her reaction closely. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I saw a flicker of guilt. But she quickly composed herself, her voice calm. "We're doing what's best for the family. What about what's best for me?" I shot back, my voice rising. "You're using my college fund for something that doesn't even include me." She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Elara, it's not that simple. We'll make it right." I shook my head, disbelief mingling with anger. "You always say that, but nothing ever changes." The tension between us was palpable, the silence heavy with unspoken words. I turned away, unable to bear the sight of her anymore. I needed to get out, to clear my head before I said something I couldn't take back. I found myself at Fiona and Leo's house, the one place that felt safe. Fiona greeted me with a hug, her warmth a balm to my frayed nerves. "What's wrong, Elara?" she asked gently, leading me to the kitchen table. I hesitated, the words caught in my throat. But as I looked into her kind eyes, the dam broke. I told her everything, the words tumbling out in a rush of frustration and despair. "Oh, sweetheart," Fiona said, her voice full of sympathy. "I'm so sorry you're going through this." Leo joined us, his expression serious. "You know you're always welcome here, Elara. We'll help you however we can." Their support was a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. But as much as I wanted to stay, to escape the chaos at home, I knew I couldn't run forever. I needed to face this head-on, to find a way to protect my future. That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of everything pressed down on me. I felt like I was drowning, the surface just out of reach. But even as the darkness threatened to swallow me whole, a small spark of determination flickered to life. I wouldn't let them win. I would find a way to reclaim my future, no matter what it took. The day of the confrontation arrived with a tension that seemed to seep into every corner of the house. I had spent the night at Fiona and Leo's, gathering my thoughts and steeling myself for what lay ahead. Now, as I stood outside my childhood home, I felt a strange mix of dread and determination. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. Marissa and Grant were seated at the dining table, their expressions unreadable. Nolan and Vivian were there too, having arrived earlier, their presence adding to the charged atmosphere. Jackson stood by my side, a silent ally in this battle. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady though my heart raced. "I wanted to talk about the college fund and what it means for my future." Marissa shifted in her seat, her eyes darting to Grant. "Elara, we've already explained that it's a temporary situation." I shook my head, cutting her off. "No, it's not just temporary. I know about the house. I know you're planning to use my money for something that doesn't involve me." Grant leaned forward, his tone placating. "Elara, we're doing this for the family. You're part of that family. And yet you're willing to sacrifice my future for it," I replied, my voice rising with each word. "How is that fair?" Nolan cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the conversation. "We'll make it right, Elara. We'll find a way to pay it back." "How?" I demanded, my frustration boiling over. "By the time you do, it'll be too late. I'll have nothing left for college." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy. I could see the cracks in their resolve, the realization that I wasn't going to back down this time. Vivian spoke up, her voice soft but firm. "Elara, we've made mistakes. We know that. But you have to believe we're trying to fix them." I met her gaze, searching for any hint of sincerity. "Then prove it. Stop using my money for your plans. Let me decide what's best for my future." The tension in the room was palpable, a charged silence that threatened to explode. I could feel Jackson's presence beside me, a steady reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. Finally, Marissa spoke, her voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "Elara, what do you want us to do?" I took a deep breath, the words forming with a clarity I hadn't expected. "I want control of my college fund. I want to know that my future isn't being used as collateral for someone else's dreams." Grant exchanged a look with Marissa, his expression shifting from defiance to something more resigned. "If that's what you want, we'll make it happen." A flicker of relief washed over me, but I knew this was just the beginning. "And I want it in writing," I added, my voice firm. "I need to know that I can trust you to keep your word." Nolan nodded, his expression serious. "We'll draw up the paperwork. You have our word." The tension in the room began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of resolution. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. A step towards reclaiming my future, one that I had fought hard to secure. As the meeting drew to a close, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and triumph. I had faced my greatest challenge and come out stronger for it. The fight wasn't over, but I knew I had the strength to see it through. As we left the house, Jackson fell into step beside me, his expression thoughtful. "You did good, Elara." "Thanks," I replied, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I couldn't have done it without you." He shrugged, a hint of a grin on his face. "We're in this together, remember?" I nodded, feeling a sense of camaraderie that I hadn't expected but deeply appreciated. Together, we would face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with the knowledge that we could overcome anything. As we walked, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The betrayal, the anger, the fight for justice. It had been a long, difficult journey, but it had taught me more about myself than I ever thought possible. And as I moved forward, I knew that I was ready to face whatever came next, with the strength of my convictions guiding me every step of the way. Years had passed since that tumultuous time, and as I stood in the auditorium waiting for my name to be called, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The road to this moment had been long and winding, filled with challenges that had tested my strength and resilience. Yet, here I was, about to graduate from college, surrounded by the people who had supported me through it all. Fiona and Leo were in the front row, beaming with pride. Their unwavering support had been my anchor, a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. Jackson sat beside them, his presence a testament to the unexpected friendships that could blossom from adversity. As my name echoed through the hall, I walked across the stage, my heart swelling with a mix of pride and gratitude. This wasn't just my victory, it was a testament to everyone who had believed in me, who had helped me carve out a future that was truly my own. After the ceremony, we gathered outside, the sun casting a warm glow over the celebration. Fiona enveloped me in a hug, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "I'm so proud of you, Elara. You've come so far." "Thank you," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you." Leo clapped me on the back, his grin wide and genuine. "You did all the hard work. We just gave you a little nudge." Jackson joined us, his smile easy and warm. "So, what's next for you, Elara?" I shrugged, a sense of excitement bubbling up inside me. "I've got a job lined up at a dental clinic." "It's a start." As we talked and laughed, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The scars of the past hadn't vanished, but they no longer define me. I had learned to let go of the anger and resentment, to focus on building a life that was filled with purpose and love. Later, as the crowd began to disperse, I found myself alone for a moment. I reached into my bag and pulled out a letter, the familiar handwriting bringing a smile to my face. It was from Edna, my grandmother, written years ago but discovered only recently. In her letter, she spoke of her own struggles with family betrayal, of the resilience it had taken to forge her own path. Her words resonated deeply, offering a connection that spanned generations. "Dear Elara," she had written, "remember that you are stronger than you know. Life will test you, but it is in those moments that you will discover who you truly are. Trust in yourself and never forget that you are loved." As I folded the letter and tucked it away, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Edna's legacy was one of strength and compassion, and I was determined to honor it in my own life. As I turned to rejoin my friends, I caught a glimpse of Marissa and Nolan standing at a distance, their expressions uncertain yet hopeful. Our relationship had changed over the years, evolving from one of conflict to a tentative understanding. They had respected my boundaries, and while we weren't close, there was a sense of peace between us. I walked over to them, my heart steady. "Thank you for coming," I said, offering a small but genuine smile. Marissa nodded, her eyes softening. "We wouldn't have missed it for the world." Nolan cleared his throat, his voice tinged with sincerity. "We're proud of you, Elara." Their words, though simple, carried a weight of their own. They were a reminder that while the past couldn't be changed, the future was ours to shape. As I walked away, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. The journey wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the campus, I knew that this was just the beginning. I had found my place in the world, surrounded by a family I had chosen and created for myself. And as I moved forward, I carried with me the lessons of the past, the strength of those who had come before me, and the promise of a future filled with hope and possibility.